Hello and welcome to Shape the System, where we find and tell the stories that help people to rethink the way the world works. We interview people from all over the world who are helping to change our systems for the better. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures, who help ambitious founders and their teams scale up for success. More about KPMG High Growth Ventures after the interview. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Shape the System. Talking to Pete Brennan today, we're going to be talking about booze brands and better stories. Is how I've sort of thought about this up front. I don't know why they've all got B's, but we're talking to Pete from Heaps Normal, and we'll get to Heaps Normal in a second. But as always, I'm interested in understanding the problem space in which you guys are playing. So let's start with alcohol, and specifically the part of alcohol and alcohol consumption and even the culture around alcohol that you guys have kind of waded into in the last couple of years.
Yeah, thanks, Vince. Thanks for having me. It's cool to be chatting with you. Yeah, I mean, for us, we started Heaps Normal for a few reasons. Interestingly, as founders, each of us had our own reason for wanting to kind of do something in the non-alcoholic space. For me, I think it was a twofold thing for me. One, I run a branding studio and had a little bit of imposter syndrome earlier on. Like, could we make a brand without a client telling us what to do and do it the way that we think we could do it? So I had a chip on my shoulder with that. I wanted to do something there. And then, on a much more personal note, I grew up with alcoholism in the family. My dad was a pretty abusive alcoholic. Yep. Have horror stories of him beating up my mom and things like that when we were kids. And subsequently, I never had a good relationship growing up with alcohol growing up in my 20s. Lived in London for 12 years from kind of like 21 onwards. And I was the guy that would, go out and have a good time and wake up in the morning with a sore head and vaguely remember how I could get home. And for the most part, it was fun stories, but every now and again, there was a horror story of me saying something to somebody or upsetting someone. And, I probably realized a little bit too late in life that that's not the way I want to be. And, I've happily married and 3 beautiful children. And, it just dawned on me that I can't be doing that anymore. So I found myself in a situation whereby I would either become super reclusive and didn't want to go out and socialize with people because I didn't trust myself around alcohol, or I would go out and one of two things would happen. I'd either not drink and pretend I'd have an ear infection and was on make-believe antibiotics, and that was the reason, or I would have a drink and it would be playing Russian roulette. Like I'd either be able to call it after a few and go home with no problems, or I'd fall into the trap of, just letting myself go and drinking too much and making a complete fool of myself. And so, I think those 2 reasons and the other bits and pieces we've dived into there, for me, it was just like, let's make a non-alcoholic beer. And our mission from day one with Heaps Normal is to change drinking culture. I think there's lots wrong with it. We drink to commiserate, we drink to celebrate, so we drink
to catch up
because it's dinner time at the end of the day. It's just
start of the day.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's conversations to be had and there's better experiences to be had that don't necessarily have to involve alcohol.
Yeah. I want to come back because it's interesting because there's always a personal story, and it's always really interesting to link this personal story, I think, to the macro. But I am also interested in the macro. I think about Australia, which is a microcosm for probably every Western society, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, depending on which area we're looking at. I want to understand not specifically kind of alcoholism, the very pointed end of that, but more broadly, just alcohol consumption generally. And if we frame it as opposed to here's how much productivity there is and how much commercial opportunity there is in alcohol, as opposed to, hey, this is how much alcohol is consumed and this is the impact it's having on our society from a health perspective, from a productivity perspective or a life satisfaction. Why don't you frame that and give me some sense of the problem that alcohol represents maybe in an Australian context?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the first thing that I want to really call out is that at Heaps Normal, we've made a very conscious decision early on to never preach sobriety. We've never said alcohol's the devil, don't drink. We never really told people what to do. And I think that in itself has been a big reason why people have got behind what we do. I always use there's a micro and a macro example. My little boy's 4. If I say don't touch the hot plate, he's touching the hot plate no matter what, right? So, and then on the macro side, if you look at smoking cigarettes, the government's been telling us not to smoke cigarettes for years, but people still go out and smoke cigarettes. So I think the learning for me in that is we don't like to be told what to do. If a brand is going to do that, I don't think personally it's the right thing to do. So very, very early on, we just said, hey, we're a non-alcoholic beer company. We're here for you, whether you're driving tonight and you're the designated driver, or you're sober for life and you don't want to drink, or any mix in between those two kind of really drastic kind of different positions, really. And I think that's really worked for us. We've had some incredible stories from our community. I've found there's typically, we're 2 years in now, which is still very, very early days for business, but we've got traction pretty quickly out the door. And I've always found there's kind of three types of people that we speak to. There's people that go, I love Heaps Normal. I follow you on Instagram. It's one of my favorite brands. And that's always flattering and so nice to hear and lovely.
Right.
And then there's people that go, you guys are wasting your time. This is never going to work. Who on earth would drink non-alcoholic beer? You won't get a real job. And that's fine. Like you
really? Someone told you to go get a real job?
Yeah, literally someone said that at an event we did once, like some angry old man who, and that, look, that's fine. You can't be everything to everybody as a brand. And I think if you have enemies like that, yeah, exactly. And I think if brands have enemies as such, it means they stand for something, they believe in something, they have a point of view and an opinion. Yeah. And for every enemy that you have, I find that there's the same amount of people that are diehard fans that really back you and believe what you do.
Right.
So, and then the third type of person we have are people that go like, hey, I've seen you guys around. I've kind of been seeing this non-alc space. I don't really understand it. And I always say, well, instead of going out tonight and having 8 beers and probably smashing your phone and missing work tomorrow, why don't you have 4 normal beers and 4 Heaps Normal beers and everything will be okay? And the light bulb goes off and they buy a 4-pack, and then 9 times out of 10 within a week we get a DM from that person going, I had 6 of your beers last night and I got up and went to the gym before work, or I got up and went for a surf in the morning, or I wasn't in a bad mood with my kids because I was hungover.
Right.
And it's that kind of thing for me that, like, there's still, it's got a lot better in the last 2 years, but there's still that educational element of why we do what we do. You know? So back to your question, like the macro side of things, like when we first started the business early on, we did heaps of research around this and uncovered like some horror stats. Like, I think it's like $36 billion a year is what alcohol abuse costs the Australian economy on things like hospitalization and car accidents and domestic abuse and violence and disease and all these sorts of things. So there's definitely a macro issue there.
Yeah.
At the same time, there's a huge percentage, I think it was like 66% of young Australians are wanting to reduce their alcohol consumption.
Yeah, right.
So it's been really interesting. And I traveled a bit before we did this. I spent some time in Japan and in the US, and became pretty evident to me, like the youth over there they're not drinking as much as you'd expect. Like people, the US is an interesting one, particularly with the legalization of cannabis, is like the youth are going out and they're microdosing on cannabis, whether that's on an oil or a pill or smoking a joint, and they're drinking kombuchas when they go out at night, or non-alcoholic beer, which is really interesting. So I think, there's 2 things at play here. There's the macro stuff that's happening that it's kind of out of our control that we're aware of, but there's also, the stuff that we can control, which is how we operate and talk as a brand. And I think there's been a number of things that have kind of worked in our favor, like timing has been one. There's been all these different milestones. Like we got into StartMate as an accelerator program, which was a game changer for us. But there's just, I think when you work really hard in something and your timing's right and there's a bit of luck involved, I think really cool things can happen. And we're just so grateful that feels like what's happening with us at the moment.
Yeah. And I want to come back to that timing thing as well, because I think it's always a question for me as to not just why now for you, but why now generally for what you're in, right? It's easy to be swimming with the tide. Is there something that's kind of changed in the last 5 to 7 years that has kind of created the conditions for a move away from not just a move away from a drinking culture, but a broader acceptance of a mix of alcoholic, non-alcoholic, or even a move to non-alcoholic entirely? What's changed in the macro there, do you think?
I mean, for me, I think it's kind of this perfect storm. I think technology and how we make these products has massively improved in the last few years. So, non-alcoholic beer has been around since the 60s and 70s.
The actual tech to make the beer you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. It used to be called Auto Beer, I believe was the first non-alcoholic
beer. Sounds like a German beer.
In Germany.
Yeah. It was right. It was Auto Beer. Got it.
Yeah, exactly.
Genius.
Yeah, and typically the 2 ways to historically make non-alc beer is either reverse osmosis or vacuum distillation, and both of those processes involve extracting the alcohol out right at the end of the process.
Right.
The problem with that is it pulls a lot of the flavors out that you've built with the hops and the barley and the malt and everything else that you put in there. So that's what historically has given a lot of non-alc beers a bad rep because they taste a bit watery and a bit kind of flavorless. What we've done is we've really innovated on how we do this. So we use a very specific yeast that micro-ferments to just under 0.5%. That all stays within the brewing process. We don't take anything out. And anything under 0.5% can be classified as non-alcoholic. So, for example, a ripe banana can be up to 0.5% alcohol. A glass of orange juice that's been in the fridge for a week, even a loaf of bread on the shelf. Those sugars and everything else that happens in those wonderful biological processes can micro-ferment up to 0.5% alcohol. And, it's just a trace amount that's in there. I mean, you could drink 24 Heaps Normal beers in a row and still drive home and be absolutely fine if you got pulled over. There's no way you can get drunk on it.
You'd probably be a problem somewhere else, but sure.
Yeah, you'd probably need the toilet quite a bit, but otherwise I think you'd be okay. There's that kind of stuff going on within the technological advancements of how we make these products. But I think from a consumer awareness point of view as well, like people are just wising up to what we put into our bodies, like there's been a massive health and wellness trend around the world for the last few years, as we know. And I think COVID worked in our favor massively. I think the first lockdown, everyone, went to the bottle shop and stocked up and said, we're in this for a few weeks and let's drink through it. And then the second lockdown, people went, oh man, we can't do that again. Let's not do that. And our timing worked really well. We were just there and it really worked in our favor. So yeah, it's this kind of like perfect storm of technology and timing and consumer awareness. I mean, if you think about it, alcohol is ethanol, like it's poison. Like but as a community and as a society, we've figured out how to make it cold and fizzy and taste like flavors and fruit, and we drink it and it gives us a bit of a buzz. But if you were to strip all that stuff out and drink 100% alcohol, you'd die. I mean, we put ethanol in our cars, so it is a poison, but it's an accepted poison that we've learned to become normal around and behave around and stuff like that. So like I said at the beginning, like our mission is to normalize mindful drinking. And I think that doesn't necessarily mean being completely sober and cutting alcohol out completely. But, if we can help someone not get drunk and make a fool of themselves like I used to do when I was younger, then I think we're onto a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, there's a couple of things I want to come into on this. The one about technology is interesting because I had a kind of a question coming in the chat today. I'm always interested in things that have some step change in the product, and the product's good. I remember when we first met at the Collective Consciousness Expo, I think it was called, about a year and a bit ago, sometime in the middle of COVID somehow, or somehow that happened.
Don't know how we pulled that one off, but yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, it was wonderful. There was supposed to be one in Melbourne and no one ever made it, but maybe next year. And the product is really good. The product tastes amazing, right? So I can say that having drunk the product. I was going to get one for today, but didn't quite make it in time.
That's all right.
Just in terms of how you spoke before about how some of these things lined up for you guys as a company, as four individuals coming together with your own backstory and wanting to do something about this in the imposter syndrome. Did you kind of know that the technology got better? You're thinking, you know what, these things aren't good, but they actually are some good ones now, and the reason is because of this? Or was that just a happy coincidence that when you got into it, you realized actually you can make great product now? Now we're going to have to come up with our own one, but the building blocks are there. Is that how that kind of panned out for you?
Yeah, I mean, just to call this out, like, at the beginning of this journey, I knew nothing about beer except what it tastes like.
General beer or just non-alc beer?
Just beer and non-alc in general. I don't know much about the category, to be honest. I had faith in myself as a brand builder. I've been running a branding studio now for 6 years, and we've built some brands for clients in the past that have worked out really well and done really good stuff for their businesses. And so I was confident in my ability to build a brand, but I didn't know anything about how to make beer. So it was an interesting journey. I sat there twiddling with can designs and brand names for a few months, not knowing what to do with it. And then plucked up the courage to kind of, get the word out and start speaking to some people, and went and met with 4 breweries around Sydney through, introductions through friends, and kind of had this pitch deck and pitched the idea. And to be frank, was politely laughed out of the room. Like I was told non-alc beer is never going to be a thing. Why would people drink that? And it's not something we want to do. And
why wouldn't they want to do it, by the way?
I don't know. I think for a lot of beer companies back then being only 2 years ago.
2 years ago, That's a world apart from where we are today, by the way.
Totally. I think for a lot of beer companies 2 years ago, the thought of having a non-alc beer would kind of go against their whole mission as a business, or, their whole portfolio. And it's changed massively in the short period of time that's only 2 years. I mean, we used to walk into pubs in the early days and try and sell Heaps Normal, and we had one guy in particular who ran a pub in Melbourne who had a sip and went, oh, it's delicious, and started naming the flavor profiles. And then we told him it's non-alcoholic in his second sip, and he spat it out on the floor and told us to get out. It was that crazy. And
wow,
it's really interesting because then, the conversation goes, well, why wouldn't you stock it? He goes, well, why would I do that? And you go, okay, well, does anyone come in here who doesn't drink alcohol? And he goes, yeah, heaps, and they drink bloody water, and I make no money off them. And he goes, well, what if you sold them a can of Heaps Normal? And again, the light bulb goes off, they give it a try, and then they sell a lot of it, and then they make money off it, and then they become an advocate for what we're doing. Yeah, there's been a lot of stories like that have been super interesting, and it's just a learning curve for us at every moment,
Yeah, and look, and this interplay of product and brand, like, is super interesting for me. And we've talked about brand a bit, and I always thought coming into the show that we would. I know that you run. What's the name of the agency again?
Electric and Analog.
Electric and Analog. So, like, your kind of backstory here, or a big part of your backstory, is having worked with brands and built brands before. Mm-hmm. And whilst I think if you tried to build this brand 6 years ago or 10 years ago, and the underlying product wasn't a good product, it would have been challenging. So, assuming that we do have a great product and that's what we're working with, it feels to me like so much of what Heaps Normal is having to do to change a culture, being your top line mission, is all about brand building. Am I kind of understanding that correctly?
Yeah, massively. I mean, you're talking to the brand guy, so I'm always going to say it's built on brand, right? But Benny's a co-founder of the business, and obviously my business partner, and he's our head of product. He's a brewer by trade. He's worked with the likes of Young Henry's and Grifter and Four Pines and some really great beer companies. That he's been an intricate part of those teams, building out those products and those beers. And so, his knowledge of that product space is second to none. He's got the most established palate I've ever come across. He can drink a beer and tell you everything that's in it immediately, which always fascinates me.
I didn't know that was a thing. So that's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. and I think it's just been a really interesting mix. I think the brand that we've built is, it's meaningful. It stands for something. It's quite different. It's quite nostalgic at the same time. So I think people are kind of attracted to us in that way. But we always joke that, brand is what pulls people in and the product's what gets them coming back every time, because, the beer that Benny's made is just, it tastes like a normal beer, which is such a great compliment. I mean, we, in the very early days, before we could afford to print on printed cans because the MOQs were just too expensive, we printed on plain silver cans, and my wife and my daughter and I put stickers on them by hand at our dining room table, and we handed them out to people. And it was crazy. Like we dropped them off with sommeliers and publicans and bar owners and restaurateurs that would all drink it and go, oh, this is amazing. And then we'd say, what ABV do you think it is? And they'd say, oh, like a 4%, maybe a 5%. And then we would say it's non-alcoholic, and jaws would hit the floor and they couldn't quite believe it. So
not through spitting it out.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's definitely a mix of brand and product for sure.
Yeah. Look, I guess the reason I want to go down this is that a lot of the time on this show, we talk about behavior change. Right, you can come out with a great solution, but ultimately, if it requires someone to change what they're doing, that's challenging. And when a big part of what Heaps Normal talks about as a company and as a brand is culture change, which is kind of the abstraction above behavior change. You haven't got to change one person's behavior. You've got to change the way an entire society operates. It feels to me like, the product will continue to sustain the business because people want to keep having that product as potentially opposed to another product. But the actual ability to fulfill the mission is heavily steeped in the ability to change the narrative, which is kind of branding 101. I guess that's where I'm trying to understand. Like when you came into this and said, okay, we know we've got a good product now, or we know we can build a good product because the tech's there, or we've got some, the best sommelier beer tongue in the palate in the world, plus the technology, we're going to land the product. So we're comfortable there. How did you start to think about the actual construct of the brand and the role it then plays to change narratives? That's kind of what I'm interested in there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, for me, it's about challenging what's normal, right? So if you're brought up and your parents have a glass of wine every night with their meal, and you're conditioned as a child and that's what you see every day, you just think it's normal when you get older to have a glass of wine with your meal, right? And I think anything that we're exposed to consistently, subliminally, somehow we're brainwashed into thinking that's how to normally behave. So, when we started this business, we all had the four of us, myself, Andy Miller is our CEO and a co-founder, Benny Holdstock's our head of product or head brewer and a co-founder as well, and Geordie Smith is a global brand ambassador and a co-founder. The four of us had very, very different reasons for wanting to start this business. So for me, it was a very personal thing with, growing up with alcoholism in the family. My mission on a very personal note is to kind of, if we can stop one family from having an alcoholic in the family and avoiding the kind of abuse and pain and all that kind of stuff and those challenges. And my brother and I went through as kids then, we've done really well, and I'm really happy with that. For someone like Benny, him and Andy have been in the beer industry for years, and you drink beers every day when you work for a beer company. So they, they wanted to, like they were just sick of being around alcohol and being obliged to have a drink and inevitably wake up with a hangover in the morning. I know for Andy, there was the culture change thing was a real challenge. Well, a real interesting thing for him because he spent a lot of time in China when he was younger, and he's been exposed to all these different cultures and how different cultures can be across oceans. I think that for him was a real big pull. For Benny, the brewing challenge of making a good non-alc beer that tastes really good, because historically majority of them didn't taste great, and we knew there was a gap there. And then for Geordie, Geordie's been runner-up to being the world champion surfer twice. He was looking for a competitive edge. He'd given up booze as well and was training really hard, but found that he was obliged to go out to these social situations where he would have a beer because it was just a normal, quote unquote, normal thing to do. So from a brand perspective, how do we change culture? It's a really hard thing to do. But I think it starts with us being really open and honest and vulnerable as human beings, particularly as founders of a company like Heaps Normal. I made the decision a few years ago to really just wear my heart on my sleeve. If you told me 10 years ago I'd be talking to you about my dad and all that stuff, I would have not believed you, because it's not something I would openly speak about a few years ago. Right. And I feel like with age, I'm 41 years old. I feel like the older I get, the more I just start. And I don't mean this in a dicky way, but I just don't really care what people think. And that's not like from top of my, my soapbox telling, I just don't care because I'm just too cool for school. It's just, the fact that you can have opinion about something, and there's going to be people that don't align and don't believe and don't resonate with what you're saying. And that's fine. Everyone, the chance of being everything to everybody is almost zero.
I've actually got a term for it. I call it the 7 billion principle, which is that you can't please everyone. You're 7 billion people on the planet. You might as well be who you are, at least the way people who like you it for who you are. Okay,
absolutely.
Cool. Yep. Sorry, continue. Yeah.
I talk about this a lot. There's I met these two guys who run a creative agency in Sweden called Snask, and they've written a book called Make Enemies to Gain Fans. And it's quite an interesting concept, and I believe it 100%. Their view is that if you build a brand, you need to stand for something, like we were saying earlier, and have an opinion and get behind that. And inevitably there's going to be people that don't agree with that, and people don't believe in it, they don't align with it, they're probably going to be resenting you for that and almost hate you for doing that. And that's totally fine, because there's going to be people behind that person who hates you that's going to really align with you and really believe with you and become a diehard fan of the brand.
I'm trying to connect the dots now from kind of the brand, and I know this all sounds like esoteric, but brand and narrative are the types of stories you have to tell, because a big part of what I'm observing Heaps Normal do is, hey, we've got a great product that's off the table. We've created a message that says we're not here to try and tell everyone that they need to be abstain from alcohol entirely. That's not the thing we're trying to do. We're just trying to shift people to the left or to the right, shift them up the curve or down the curve, whichever way you kind of want to do it. And that ultimately results in a whole bunch of storytelling and, I guess, articulation of individual narratives like the one that you just spoke about, from your personal story, or other people's, the ambassadors, or even just your customers. What are some of these kind of stories that you're hearing and talking about, and how does Heaps Normal, I guess, engage the people with those stories and take those stories out? How does that look?
Oh man, it's so interesting doing what we do. We're in the final days today and this weekend of our normal July campaign, which is called Just Do Your Best, and I think that campaign in terms of sentiment just really aligns with everything we stand for. And it was coined by Matthew O'Brien, who's our marketing manager, that normally what happens in July is, everyone cuts out their alcohol and goes completely stone cold sober. And it's really hard and it's shit. It's not very enjoyable for most people, So we've come and gone, well, why would you do that to yourself? Why don't you just try your best? Instead of having 5 beers tonight, have 2. And see how that feels the next day and put less pressure on yourself. And I think we've been around a lot of this commentary, of hustle and win at all costs. And I think, as the mental health spotlight is coming into effect a bit more, we're kind of being a little bit easier on ourselves and putting less pressure on ourselves to do things that we know we need to do. And I think that's really cutting through. The stories we hear day in, day out are just kind of phenomenal, really. Like pregnant women. I had no idea pregnant women were so into what we're doing. It's such a big thing.
I'm surprised that surprises you, by the way.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, as a father of 3, my wife doesn't drink, full stop. But But yeah, I mean,
this is a personal account here. I used to work at a corner store deli when I was in my late teens, and women would come in whose friend had just had a baby, and they would go and buy all the things that person couldn't eat, that lady couldn't eat for 9 months, all the smoked salmon and soft cheeses and wines, and it'd be like,
sushi,
give me all the things. So the fact that I can have a beer while I'm pregnant, I can absolutely see that.
Yeah, we get messages almost weekly from people who go like, I'm 6 months pregnant, and we've got this group of friends, and once a month we go out to the pub on a Saturday and have a pub lunch and catch up. And I was really worried about doing that, but they stock Heaps Normal at my local pub now, so it's great that I can do that and feel part of the crew. So that's a big thing. I mean, we had some great stories. Like we had this story from Winona, which is an early customer of ours down here in Manly, near where I live. They're a really nice little independent bottle shop, and we had a very early story of them where these 4 young guys came in like early 20s on a Friday night, and they were looking at the bar fridge and trying to figure out the beer fridge, and trying to figure out what beer to buy for presumably their party they were going to on the Friday night. And 4 of them all grabbed a 4-pack of Heaps Normal, and the lady behind the counter went, "Oh, they're probably fallen for the packaging or the branding. Like, I should probably let them know that it's non-alcoholic." So she called it out, and they responded by going, "Yeah, we know. Like, we're landscape gardeners. We've got a house party tonight. We've got to work tomorrow. We want to go for a surf before work, so we're going to drink Heaps Normal all night." And for me, as hearing that from someone that's like quite young is pretty interesting, because I would never have done that when I was 20. I would have gone out and drunk as much piss as I could have and had a great time, and so it's really interesting that the younger generation I mean, on the flip side of that, we had a bottle shop owner in Canberra a few months ago who said they had this really old man who came in like late 80s who looked really downcast and upset, and the bottle shop owner said to him, "Are you okay? What's going on?" And he said, "No, I just come back from the doctor, and the doctor said I've got to stop drinking alcohol, and I just don't know what to do because I've got 4 friends and we go to the pub every day at 3:00 and we drink 3 or 4 beers and we talk shit and we go home to our dogs. Their wives have all passed away, and we feed our dogs and we watch a soap opera, and then we go to bed. We eat dinner and we go to sleep." And for them, that was their church. Every day they just go and connect with their mates, and now all of a sudden, this old man was told he couldn't do that anymore. So the bottle shop owner sold him a 4-pack of Heaps Normal, and he reluctantly paid for it and took it away. And he came back the next day and bought a case, and then his mates came and bought a case the day after. And the pub that they go to is now a customer of ours, and they all go and drink Heaps Normal every day at 4:00 and 3:00 in the afternoon, and just and tell stories over a Heaps Normal as opposed to a beer, because they're at that stage of life where their doctors are saying you need to cut down your alcohol consumption, guys. So it's interesting. It's like there's so many of those stories where things that we would never have expected to happen have happened, and it just feels so nice, when you hear that someone's really enjoying what we do, and makes it kind of worth.
The thing from I guess, I mean, I had a sense coming on because I when we spoke, whenever it was a couple of years ago or a year and a half ago, I started to hear some of these stories, and obviously had a sense that there might be more. The thing I'm kind of interested in regards to the overarching aim here around changing the culture of drinking is what role do these stories play in actually changing the narrative? Like, how do you actually, I'm going to use the word weaponize them so that people are starting, I mean, you know them, and the bottle shop owner knows them, and the guy turning 80 knows them, but how do you use these to get these into the public the discourse? That's kind of what's interesting to me.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I think the answer comes down to doing exactly what we're doing right now, is just telling these stories and letting other people hear these stories and tell their stories. And a lot of it is word of mouth. I think if we go back to what we were talking about at the beginning, like brands that are preachy and tell people what to do, it just doesn't work.
Right.
I have a massive problem with authority. I hate it when people tell me what to do. If anything, I'll do the opposite, just to be that really annoying person. But
you need to drink alcoholic beer. Stuff you.
Exactly. Yeah, stuff you. I'm going to drink waters all night tonight. Yeah, it's just telling these stories. And I think authentic storytelling is really where it kind of cuts through, because it's not putting paid money behind a social media campaign to tell these stories. It's just genuinely these things happen, and we talk about them over a dinner or a beer or a glass of wine or a Heaps Normal or whatever it is. And then, that story carries on. And I've told that story a lot of times on a lot of podcasts and to a lot of friends, and I'd love to know how many times that story has been told further on and spread even further. It's really interesting. So I think, like, how do we weaponize these stories? I don't think we need to. I think we just need to tell them authentically, and I think that's that kind of authentic storytelling is what really, for me at least, cuts through. And, I take notice of those stories. I want to find out more. I get genuinely interested by them. And then, it starts me thinking in a different way. And I think that's the key here is like, if you go out every Friday and you have always had a beer and got drunk, it's like questioning normal. Is that the normal thing to do? Like, what would happen if we went out tonight and drank non-alcoholic drinks? Will we still have a good time?
Yeah, or 4 in 8, as you said, as opposed to 8 in 8 even.
Yeah, exactly. So
do you think I was going to say, do you think governments might have a better chance of actually changing drinking culture by saying to people you should just drink less and moderate rather than, showing the terrible pictures? Like, where does that? No, that's a bit of a left field question.
I mean, look at cigarettes, look at smoking, right? Like they've done that, and people still smoke cigarettes, And I think it comes back to that whole authoritarian approach, like telling people what to do is the first way, in my mind, to get people to not do that thing because we just don't like being told what to do. So, for me, it's just it's building on those stories and sharing those stories and trying to understand what it is that kind of made that person do something different and see if that works for other people as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, just getting back to kind of a little bit of the backstory here for you 4 guys. Like, I know you told me there's kind of 4 individual stories, but I'm still curious as to how the 4 of you came to be kind of to drop everything and say, let's work on this collectively. Let's go there.
Yeah, for sure. So, Electric and Analog had done some work with Young Henrys as some kind of design work. And I got to know Andy Miller throughout that time. And he'd since left the company and was doing a bit of consulting work. And I'd reluctantly gone out or not reluctantly, but unsuccessfully gone out and pitched my non-alcoholic beer empire idea to all these breweries that laughed me out the room. And was running out of options, to be honest, and hit Andy up. I saw he'd left and was doing his own thing. So ironically, we met at a pub in Piermont over a beer, and I kind of pitched it to him, and he just got it straight away. He kind of like immediately understood what I was trying to do, where I was coming from. He had some great ideas off the bat already. I said to him, my biggest problem is I don't know anyone who makes beer. So thankfully he did. He'd worked with Benny Holdstock and pulled Benny in for our second meeting. And Benny kind of looked into this thing going, wow, this is a challenge. This is super exciting. I've never done anything like this before. He knows how to make good beer. Like some of our favorite craft beers, and at least in Sydney breweries, have got his fingerprints on them in some way or form as a brewer across those brands that he's worked with. But for him, it was a real big challenge. How can we make, we'd done an audit of the category by that point. We realized there wasn't very many exciting options out there. So for him, it was a challenge. And then with Geordie, I grew up surfing. Was born in England. I moved to South Africa when I was 10 and kind of grew up surfing and surfed competitively throughout my teens and got to know Geordie really well through that time. We'd make kind of, state provincial teams every year together and go to national champs and things like that. And, got to know him pretty well. And he's obviously gone on to be South Africa's best export ever in terms of surfing, one of the consistently top 5 surfers in the world for the last 10 plus years. And so kind of approached him and just said, hey, we've got this idea and we're building a business around it and we need a little bit of funding and, would you be interested? And he jumped at the opportunity as well. So he came in as our first investor and a 4th co-founder. And 2 years later, well, more than 2 years, because we're about 12 months in kind of stealth mode development before we launched 2 years ago. So we're about 3 and a bit years in the hole now. But that's essentially how we came together. And we haven't looked back since. It's been a really interesting journey.
I guess the thing that kind of where I was getting to with that was that so often it's one person in a room or 1 or 2 people in a room and then they're trying to nut it out. And it feels to me like the multitude of things that had to be done well meant that was just never going to be possible, right? You might have had all the brand authority in the world from your experience, but if you're not able to go and get these guys to brew this stuff or get people to want to buy it, then it was never going to work unless you had at least 3 of those 4 legs and probably all 4 of those legs. I'm trying to understand if there's parallels here for a lot of people who are going in to try and change the way an entire industry or an entire system works to actually understand, look, it's going to take a village. Is that sort of, was it as constructed as that in terms of thought through, or did you just think, hey, I know a guy who does a thing, or I know someone who does this part? How did that actually kind of eventuate?
Yeah, absolutely. So we the four of us kind of hunkered down and we're building out this brand and the product. And weirdly, around the same time, what happened for us, which was such an amazing stroke of luck for us, was Nick Crocker, who's one of the partners at Blackbird Ventures, had reached out to Andy and said, hey, we're doing StartMate again this year. There's a new cohort. StartMate's an accelerator program run by Blackbird. And essentially how it works, I can't remember if it's 6 or 12 weeks off the top of my head, but it's just kind of, let's call it a 12-week accelerator program where if you get selected, you have mentoring kind of day in, day out by these incredible mentors. And the problem is it's notoriously very difficult to get into StartMate. So I think at the time they were having roughly 700 to 800 startups apply to get in, and they choose 12.
Right.
So we were, Nick said to Andy, hey, just apply to get in. And if I remember correctly, his words were, "You'll never get in because we're a tech accelerator program, but at least answering the questions that we ask will get you thinking about your business in a different way and will probably benefit you guys."
Yeah.
So we did. We applied to get in, and we filled out a bunch of forms. And three of us, because Geordie was overseas, three of us sat literally here in my little home studio here and went through all the questions and answered them as best we could over an hour or so, and then click submit, and we thought that's cool. We learned some stuff. There was some pretty tricky questions there. And then, a week or so later, we got an email saying, congrats, you've been accepted into the next round, which was doing this kind of hour-long speed dating thing with a bunch of investors and mentors. And so we couldn't believe it. We got shortlisted. I think it was the top 40. So we did that. And that was, speed dating with people like Kate Morris from Adore Beauty and Danny Millen from Koala and Simon Griffiths from Who Gives a Crap, and all these amazing mentors of people that have walked this path before us, started a business from nothing, from their spare rooms and their coffee table, their kitchen tables, and built these businesses that are doing very well and have really big valuations. And so it was so great to learn from them through that, and they asked us some really poignant questions again that we answered as best as we could. And then we couldn't believe it. We got accepted into the cohort, so that was the beginning of what fundamentally got us up and running, really. I mean, just little things like how to run a meeting efficiently, how to work remotely and check in every day as a remote company and make sure we're all across what everyone's doing. So these little kind of practices of things that you think you know how to do, but when someone tells you you've been doing it wrong forever, you realize you've done it wrong for a long time.
Yeah.
And, off the back of that, they have this thing called Demo Day, which is essentially like Shark Tank, Dragon's Den, where you do your pitch to these investors. We were the first cohort to do it remotely because of COVID. So we pitched to, I think it was 100 or so investors at the time on a Zoom call, and kind of ended our 3 or 4 minute pitch. And that was it. And we wanted to raise, I think it was $1.2 million. And within, I think it was 48 hours, we had like $1.8 million of interest of money we wanted to invest in our company. We scaled some people back and we settled on, I think, $1.3 million. And that was really our first bit of proper money that allowed us to put rubber on the road and go into production and, up our production capacity and, print on the cans for the first time ever as well. Not putting hand stickers on. Yeah, exactly. Much to my wife and my daughter's delight. And then get a couple of key hires. We hired pretty quickly off the back of that. And then, following that in December gone last year, we did another $8.5 million raise, which is our Series A. And we wouldn't have been able to raise that money without being in StartMate, because everyone who kind of followed on were our initial investors that invested in the first place. So it's been kind of the sum of all parts of our timing and our network of people that we know, and COVID thing weirdly working in our favor, and this kind of perfect storm that's just really worked for us. So it's been an interesting ride.
That sort of unlocked it. And I'm curious, probably just as an adjunct to that, and I guess closing question as well, it felt like getting into that kind of crystallized everyone's not commitment, but desire to stop doing everything else and start doing this, pretty much full time. I know you're still running the agency in parallel as well, but realistically, this is the big focus. If ignoring the capital aspect of this and thinking about kind of what's the next massive lever for you guys to go from where you're at today to kind of looking back in 2 years and us having this conversation going, that was the next massive step up. What's your next start, mate, if you like, from where you're standing today?
We're in about 4,000 venues around the country in Australia. We're on shelf in Malaysia, Singapore, about to be Hong Kong, I think for us, it's definitely international expansion. We're really taking that quite seriously and exploring that quite in a lot of detail at the moment. I think there's a lot of opportunity to take this brand overseas. But I think even more locally, it's a really exciting time for us at the moment. There's the categories exploding, which is great. I read something the other day that was 300 and something trademarks issued in the last 3 months, and 64 of them were non-alcoholic drinks. It's like, it's crazy, but that's really good for the category because it's just, it's proof in the pudding that what we're doing is real. And, people are seriously considering non-alc drinks as an option. In terms of what the next start meta is for us, I'm not sure, to be honest. I think it's just putting one foot in front of the other. We've got some pretty ambitious growth targets this year that we're on track to hit, which is really exciting. And just taking this brand further afield. Geordie's got a big presence in the US as well. So we're looking at that. We're having some conversations with UK distributors. So there's heaps of opportunity. And, the grander scheme of things, this week we're 2 years old as a business. So it's still, we're still a toddler, really. It feels like we've been doing this for a lifetime. But
with the terrible twos and
exactly. So we're just so excited and also just super grateful that people are giving this whole category a go, and really trying to, I guess, unlearn everything they've known their whole lives, that this is what we do when we socialize, is we crack open an alcoholic beverage and giving it a go to do something that has no alcohol in it, and being quite pleasantly surprised that it's actually just as much fun, if not more.
Yeah, amazing. Well, as one parting thought, I hope not too proud to occasionally go back to those 4 guys who wouldn't brew it for you and
oh man,
went to the scoreboard.
I would never do that, but yeah, it's interesting. I mean, like, the interesting thing for me is, like, now a lot of beer companies are introducing a non-alc skew to the range, which is great. I mean, it's on one hand, it's a little bit of a contradiction sometimes. They're pushing the alcohol thing hard, and that makes up a lot of their revenue. But I think the fact that those manufacturers are recognizing that there's people out there that don't want to drink alcohol all the time or as much as they used to, it just works. It just works for our brand. It works for other non-alcoholic brands. It works for the category as a whole. Yeah. And I think the more people that are doing this, the better.
Beautiful. Absolute pleasure talking booze, brands, and better stories with you today. I'm glad I got those 3 Bs in. And I'm so excited to see where you guys go from here. I'd love to have that chat in 2 years' time and see what that next start mate was for you.
Lock it in. Thanks, Vince. It's been really cool chatting with you, man. Thanks for having me on.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Shape the System. As usual, if you'd like to suggest a guest, someone that you know who's helped change a system for the better, please go to www.shapethesystem.org, click on the top right-hand corner, then click Suggest Guest. Make sure that you click subscribe so that you get the new episode. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures. Connects founders to the services they need along their journey. Whether you are looking to refine your strategy, mature your finance function, prepare for a capital raise, expand abroad, or simply comply with regulatory requirements, they provide you with the support you need to drive your business forward.